Nathan Carter had seen his fair share of battles, first as a land surveyor, navigating the unpredictable terrain of construction sites, and later as a homeowner fighting off the encroaching rules of the local HOA. When he purchased his house, he had envisioned a peaceful life, free from unnecessary interference. Nestled in a quiet neighborhood, his property was his pride and joy, a place where he could unwind after long days spent in the field. But Karen had other plans. Karen Thompson, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, ran the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. From mailbox colors to the length of grass blades, nothing escaped her watchful gaze. She had a particular distaste for Nathan, not because he had ever caused trouble, but because he didn't cower to the HOA's ever-changing list of arbitrary rules. And when he decided to install a fence around his backyard for some long-overdue privacy, Karen saw her opportunity to flex her power. It started with a letter. Nathan found it tucked under his windshield wiper one morning, a crisp white envelope with the HOA's official seal. Inside, a typed notice read, "Mr. Carter, your request to construct a fence on your property has been denied. Per HOA guidelines, no unauthorized fencing is permitted. Failure to comply will result in fines. Consider this your first warning." Nathan scoffed, shaking his head. Unauthorized? He knew the law, and he sure as hell knew property lines better than anyone in this neighborhood. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the local zoning laws. Just as he expected, nothing prohibited a fence on his own land. The next morning, as he unloaded lumber from his truck, a sharp voice cut through the air. "You're making a big mistake," Karen announced, striding across the cul-de-sac like she owned it. Nathan turned, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Good morning to you too, Karen." She folded her arms, her smug expression unwavering. "Did you not get my notice? You can't put up a fence." Nathan leaned against his truck. "That's funny. I checked the local ordinances, and it turns out I can." Karen's lips pursed. "This neighborhood has standards. We don't want people putting up unsightly barriers. It disrupts the aesthetic harmony." "Aesthetic harmony?" Nathan laughed. "Karen, my yard backs up to a drainage ditch. No one's aesthetic is getting ruined except maybe some squirrels." Karen's face reddened. "Rules are rules, Nathan. And as HOA president, I have the final say." He exhaled slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Karen, I respect that you have a job to do, but you don't have jurisdiction over private property boundaries." "Actually, we do," she snapped. "I suggest you drop this before it becomes a problem." Nathan recognized a power trip when he saw one, and he wasn't about to let this slide. He watched as Karen strutted away, already reaching for her phone. This was just the beginning. HOA's first power move. The next morning, Nathan found a bright orange notice taped to his front door. "Violation notice. Unauthorized construction," it read in bold capital letters. Below that, a fine was listed, $500. Due immediately. Failure to comply will result in additional penalties. Nathan scoffed. That was fast. He hadn't even broken ground yet, but Karen was already playing dirty. As he pulled the notice down, he saw movement across the street. There she was, Karen, standing on her porch, watching him like a hawk, a smug smirk creeping across her lips. Nathan folded the paper neatly, tucking it into his pocket. He didn't have time for this nonsense, but he also wasn't the type to back down. Later that afternoon, he walked into the HOA office, a small building adjacent to the neighborhood's community center. Karen was seated behind the front desk, her hands clasped together like she had been expecting him. "Ah, Nathan," she said sweetly. "I assume you're here to settle your fine?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "No, I'm here to tell you your fine is nonsense." Karen's expression hardened. "Our bylaws strictly prohibit unauthorized construction." Nathan pulled out his phone, scrolling to the zoning laws. "According to county regulations, I'm well within my rights to put up a fence. And since my property lines extend beyond your HOA jurisdiction, your little fine is invalid." Karen leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Nathan, you're being difficult. The HOA has the authority to enforce neighborhood standards." "No," he corrected. "You have the authority to enforce HOA-approved standards within common areas and shared spaces." "My yard? That's my land." Karen's smirk twitched. "You agreed to the HOA rules when you bought your house." Nathan crossed his arms. "I agreed to reasonable rules, not arbitrary power trips." Karen exhaled sharply. "Look, Nathan, I'm trying to help you here. If you just comply now, we can avoid making this a bigger issue." "Oh, I don't mind big issues," Nathan replied casually. "Especially when I know I'm right." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone who knew what he was talking about. Fine, she said, standing abruptly. Have it your way. Nathan turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. But don't say I didn't warn you. The next morning, a county inspector knocked on Nathan's door. Morning, the man said, adjusting his clipboard. We received an anonymous complaint about unpermitted construction on your property. Nathan chuckled. Anonymous, huh? Let me guess, short blonde woman, thinks she runs the neighborhood. The inspector smirked. Something like that. Nathan motioned toward his backyard. Well, as you can see, no construction yet. Just materials. But since you're here, want to check my property survey? It's up to date. The inspector flipped through his notes, glancing at the official records Nathan had prepared. Everything looks good. I'll file this as a false complaint. As the inspector left, Nathan glanced across the street. Karen stood by her mailbox, watching. When she saw Nathan looking, she turned on her heel and stormed inside. Nathan grinned. She wasn't expecting him to fight back. But this battle was far from over. The HOA escalates the conflict. Nathan had expected Karen to back off after the inspector shut down her bogus complaint. But if anything, she doubled down. The next morning, another letter arrived, this time certified mail. Final warning, noncompliance. Nathan skimmed through the official-looking document. It claimed that his fence materials were an unauthorized obstruction, and that the HOA was within its rights to remove them at his expense. He chuckled darkly. Oh, so now we're making up laws? But the real kicker came at the bottom of the letter. Failure to comply will result in a lien being placed on your property. Nathan's amusement faded. A lien? Over a fence he hadn't even built yet? That wasn't just HOA overreach. It was illegal. This was war. Digging for dirt. Nathan wasn't the type to make accusations without evidence. He spent the next evening combing through HOA records, cross-referencing them with public property laws. What he found made his blood boil. Karen had been selectively enforcing HOA rules. One homeowner had been fined for using the wrong type of mulch, while another had been given a warning and allowed to correct the issue. A neighbor down the block had installed a gazebo without HOA approval, but instead of being fined, they had conveniently donated to the HOA fund. The previous homeowner of Nathan's house had filed multiple disputes against the HOA, all of which were mysteriously denied. Nathan realized the pattern. Karen's power wasn't about rules, it was about who played by her game. And he wasn't about to play. Dissent in the ranks. The next day, Nathan started talking to his neighbors. Most of them were hesitant at first. You don't mess with the HOA, one man muttered, shaking his head. But then, little by little, the stories came out. One woman confided that she'd paid $1,000 in bogus fines just to avoid harassment. Another neighbor revealed that Karen had threatened to evict them over a flower bed. And then there was the retired couple down the street. She tried to foreclose on our home, the elderly man admitted quietly. Said we had unpaid dues. Turns out she was charging us extra, only us. Nathan's jaw clenched. How many people had she bullied into silence? It was time to take the fight to her doorstep. Karen makes her next move. Nathan barely had time to set his plan into motion before Karen struck again. That evening, he came home to find his fence materials missing. Gone. Vanished. In their place, a fresh HOA violation notice, taped to his front door. Unauthorized materials removed per HOA compliance standards. Fine, $1,200. Nathan gritted his teeth. This wasn't a game anymore. She had just stolen his property. And now, it was time to take her down. The HOA oversteps and the protagonist strikes back. Nathan stood on his front porch, fists clenched as he read the latest violation notice. Karen had crossed the line. This wasn't just a petty fine, she had stolen his materials. And that was a crime. Karen's big mistake. Nathan wasted no time. First, he called the non-emergency police line to report the theft of his property. Then, he went inside, pulled up his security camera footage, and fast-forwarded to the time-stamped moment when his materials had disappeared. Sure enough, there it was. A crew of HOA-approved workers had pulled up with a truck, loaded up his lumber, and driven off. And standing right there, overseeing it all? Karen. Smug. Smiling. Nathan grinned. The call that changed everything. The next morning, Nathan paid a visit to the city zoning office. Armed with evidence, he explained the situation. The city official raised an eyebrow. Wait, you're saying the HOA confiscated your property? Yep, Nathan replied. On private land, without legal authority. The official scribbled something down. That's highly illegal. Figured as much, Nathan said. But here's the kicker. She's threatening a lien on my property for violations that aren't even real. That got the official's full attention. A lien? Nathan nodded. Would you like to see the letter? He slid the official-looking HOA document across the desk. The man picked it up, scanned it, and exhaled sharply. This is fraud. Exactly. The official stood. I need to make some calls. Nathan smirked. Now we were getting somewhere. The HOA meeting showdown. That evening, the HOA held its monthly meeting. The community center was packed, more so than usual. Word had spread that Nathan had uncovered something big. Karen, standing at the front, gave her usual speech about community standards and ensuring compliance. But this time, she wasn't met with silent agreement. Instead, the crowd shifted uncomfortably. And then Nathan raised his hand. Karen's smile faltered. Nathan, this isn't an open forum for complaints. Oh, this isn't a complaint, he interrupted, standing up. This is an exposé. He pulled out a USB drive, plugged it into the projector, and played the footage. The entire room gasped as they watched Karen's crew stealing Nathan's fence materials in broad daylight. That's not what it looks like. Karen stammered. Oh, but it is, Nathan said, folding his arms. And just so we're clear, I already filed a police report. Silence. Then murmurs. Whispers of she can't do that, and that's illegal spread through the crowd. But Nathan wasn't done. He held up the fraudulent lien letter. And let's talk about this. You tried to put a fraudulent lien on my property. I took this to the city zoning office, and guess what? They confirmed it's not legally enforceable. Karen's face turned beet red. That's ridiculous. No, Karen. What's ridiculous is that you've been scamming people for years, Nathan said. How many of you have been unfairly fined? Slowly, hands went up. How many of you have had money go missing from the HOA budget? More hands. Karen backed toward the exit, but Nathan wasn't letting her escape that easily. Before you go, he called after her, just a heads up, the city officials are investigating your financial management of the HOA. Karen froze. And then, she ran. The tables have turned. As Karen fled the meeting, Nathan turned to the crowd. It's time we take back control. A neighbor stood up. I say we call for a vote to remove Karen from the HOA board. Cheers. Agreement. A vote was cast on the spot. And within minutes, Karen Thompson was officially removed as HOA president. But for Nathan, the fight wasn't over yet. Because now, he was going after the entire HOA. Karen's final, desperate move. Karen may have been removed from the HOA board, but she wasn't going down without a fight. Nathan knew it was only a matter of time before she tried something desperate. He just didn't expect her to be this reckless. The late-night incident. Nathan had installed extra security cameras after Karen's last stunt. He wasn't taking any chances. And it paid off. At 2:14 a.m., motion sensors lit up his front yard. His phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected, front porch. Nathan groggily grabbed his phone, blinking at the screen. And there she was. Karen, standing on his porch. A clipboard in one hand. A can of spray paint in the other. Nathan sat up straight. What the hell? She crouched down, shaking the can. A soft hiss echoed as she started spraying his porch steps. Nathan hit record on the camera feed. When she finally stepped back, he saw what she had done. Violation, code enforcement. She had faked an official HOA violation. On his own property. Nathan grinned. Oh, she was done. Busted. The next morning, Nathan didn't call the HOA. He didn't call the city zoning office. He called the police. When the officer arrived, Nathan simply pulled out his phone and played the footage. The cop's eyebrows shot up. That's wow. Yep. She really spray-painted a fake violation on your property? Sure did. The officer sighed. That's trespassing. Vandalism, too. Nathan's grin widened. What do you say we pay her a little visit? The ultimate confrontation. Karen was outside, watering her flower bed when the police cruiser rolled up. She froze. Nathan stepped out behind the officer, arms crossed. Karen Thompson? The cop asked. Karen forced a smile. Oh, officer. What seems to be the problem? The officer held up Nathan's phone. Paused on the frame of Karen, spray can in hand. Karen's smile vanished. You're being charged with trespassing and vandalism, the officer said. We have video evidence. Karen's mouth opened and closed. She turned to Nathan, her face livid. You set me up, she shrieked. Nathan laughed. Karen, you literally recorded yourself committing a crime. Her hands shook as the officer pulled out a citation notice. You have two options, the officer said. Either accept the citation and pay the fine. Or what? Karen snapped. You'll arrest me? The officer raised an eyebrow. If you'd prefer. Karen snatched the paper out of his hand, her entire body trembling with rage. This isn't over, she hissed at Nathan. He grinned. Actually, it is. Karen stormed inside, slamming the door. Nathan turned to the officer. So, what happens now? Well, the cop said, given the HOA situation, I'd suggest you take this to small claims court. She'll be paying for those damages. Nathan chuckled. Karen was finished. And the best part, he wasn't done with her yet. HOA crumbles and Karen's downfall. Nathan barely had time to enjoy the satisfaction of Karen's public humiliation before things started falling apart. For her and the HOA. The fallout begins. News of Karen's vandalism charge spread like wildfire. By the afternoon, neighbors were buzzing about it, sharing the security footage in group chats and on local Facebook pages. Did you see this? One post read. Our HOA president caught red-handed committing a crime. Comments piled up. She's been a nightmare for years. We need to audit the HOA finances. Honestly, I'm not paying another cent in HOA dues until she's gone. Nathan had expected backlash, but he hadn't anticipated just how many people Karen had pissed off over the years. That evening, an emergency HOA meeting was called. And this time, Karen wasn't in charge. The vote that changed everything. Nathan walked into the community center to find a packed house. Dozens of neighbors had shown up, some who hadn't attended a single HOA meeting in years. At the front, a few remaining board members looked nervous. They had supported Karen, but now they were distancing themselves. Nathan took a seat near the front as one of the HOA members cleared his throat. Given recent events, the man began, it's been decided that a vote will be held on whether to remove Karen Thompson from the HOA entirely. A murmur ran through the room. Karen, seated stiffly in the front row, stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You can't just. Oh, but we can, Nathan cut in smoothly. And we will. Karen's eyes flashed. This is a witch hunt. I have done nothing wrong. Nathan leaned back in his chair. I don't know, Karen. The security footage says otherwise. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Karen's jaw clenched. The board member cleared his throat again. All in favor of removing Karen Thompson from the HOA? Hands shot up. One by one. Row after row. Nathan counted. 20. 30. 40. Karen's face drained of color. The board member exhaled. That's a majority vote. He turned to Karen. Effective immediately, you are permanently banned from holding any position within the HOA. For the first time since this war began, Karen was speechless. She stood there livid, humiliated, powerless. Then, without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out. The door slammed shut behind her. And just like that, Karen Thompson was officially dethroned. But it didn't end there. With Karen gone, the real dirt started coming out. Nathan and a few other homeowners demanded a financial audit of the HOA's records. And guess what? They found thousands of dollars in miscellaneous fees that couldn't be accounted for. For years, Karen had been skimming money off the top, issuing bogus fines, and padding her own pockets. The city got involved. The state HOA regulatory board got involved. And within weeks, the entire HOA was under investigation. By the end of the month, the HOA was dissolved. The neighborhood was finally free. And Karen, well, let's just say, she wasn't sticking around to deal with the fallout. The final blow. One afternoon, as Nathan sipped coffee on his fully legal front porch, he noticed a moving truck pulling up to Karen's house. A for sale sign had been hammered into her front yard overnight. She was leaving, fleeing, running from the mess she created. Nathan chuckled, raising his mug in a silent toast. Game over, Karen. The HOA faces full legal consequences. With Karen gone and the HOA dissolved, Nathan thought the battle was finally over. But the real reckoning was just beginning. The lawsuits roll in. The moment the HOA audit was completed, the results were damning. Karen hadn't just been issuing bogus fines. She had been embezzling funds for years. Over $50,000 in unaccounted expenses had been siphoned from HOA dues. Homeowners had been wrongfully fined, with the money never properly recorded. Selective enforcement had allowed some people to bypass fines, for a price. Nathan wasn't surprised, but the state investigators were. Within a week, former HOA board members started lawyering up. And then came the lawsuits. A class action suit was filed by the homeowners. The state HOA commission launched a formal investigation. The city issued a cease and desist order against the HOA's former leadership. Nathan, being the well-prepared land surveyor that he was, had compiled every piece of evidence. He hand-delivered it to the attorneys representing the homeowners. "This," he told them, "is how you take them down." Karen's worst nightmare. Nathan knew Karen had been laying low ever since she was ousted. But she couldn't hide forever. One evening, as Nathan was heading back from work, he got a text from a neighbor. "Turn on the news." Now. Nathan hurried inside, flipped on the TV, and there she was. Karen Thompson, standing outside the county courthouse, looking miserable as a swarm of reporters bombarded her with questions. "Ms. Thompson, are you aware that former HOA members are accusing you of financial misconduct? Do you have anything to say about the class action lawsuit? Is it true that you personally profited from HOA funds?" Karen's face was ashen. She muttered something about this being a misunderstanding before shoving past the cameras and bolting into the building. Nathan laughed out loud. Oh, this was too good. The protagonist's final power move. While Karen scrambled to save herself, Nathan decided to end this once and for all. He went to City Hall, where the case was being reviewed, and submitted one final document. A petition, signed by nearly every homeowner in the neighborhood. The request? To permanently ban Karen Thompson from ever serving on an HOA board again. The city's response. 1 week later, the verdict came in. Karen wasn't just barred from ever joining an HOA again. She was facing civil penalties for fraud. The former HOA board members were being ordered to pay back thousands in stolen funds. And Nathan, he got to watch it all unfold from the comfort of his porch, with his brand new, fully approved fence standing proudly behind him. Karen's personal downfall. With the lawsuits in full swing and the former HOA board crumbling under legal pressure, Karen tried to disappear. She had lost everything, her position, her influence, and soon her home. The auction that ended it all. Nathan had been keeping an eye on her property listing. At first, she had tried to sell it herself. But with the ongoing lawsuits and her name being dragged through the mud, no one wanted to buy from her. She couldn't even get a lowball offer. Then the worst happened. Karen defaulted on her mortgage. And just like that, her house went into foreclosure. Poetic justice. One morning, Nathan walked past the community bulletin board and spotted a flyer. Bank auction, former HOA president's home. He grinned. Oh, this was too perfect. The auction was public, and you better believe half the neighborhood showed up. Karen wasn't there. She was too ashamed to show her face. But Nathan? He stood in the back, watching as strangers bid on the home she had once ruled from like a tyrant. When the final gavel fell, a young couple bought the house for nearly half its original value. One of the neighbors nudged Nathan. That's karma for you. Nathan smirked. Couldn't have scripted it better myself. Karen's rock bottom. A week later, Nathan got one last update about Karen. A neighbor who worked in local government had spotted her at City Hall, arguing with a clerk. She was trying to fight the fines, the neighbor said, shaking his head, begging for a payment plan. But the best part? Karen had taken a job at another HOA. Apparently, some small, desperate community had hired her as an assistant, a massive step down from her former throne. Nathan laughed until his ribs hurt. From a power-hungry tyrant to a low-level HOA clerk? That was the ultimate punishment. And just like that, Karen was officially defeated. Epilogue and final mic drop. With Karen gone for good, the neighborhood finally felt free. No more ridiculous fines. No more petty power trips. No more Karen. And Nathan? He was enjoying every second of it. The neighborhood after Karen. The HOA had been dissolved, and homeowners were finally making their own decisions. Lawns weren't under constant surveillance anymore. People painted their houses however they wanted. And best of all, Nathan got to build his fence. A moment of humor. One afternoon, as Nathan was putting the finishing touches on his perfectly legal fence, his neighbor walked over with a piece of paper in hand. They handed it to him with a straight face. Violation notice. Too much freedom. Please comply immediately. Nathan stared at it for a second. Then his neighbor cracked up laughing. Nathan joined in. Yeah, the reign of the HOA dictator was over. And in its place? A neighborhood that was finally a community again. As Nathan leaned against his freshly built fence, coffee in hand, he took one last satisfied look around. No Karen. No HOA. No problems. Life was good.